Welcome everyone. Today we have new episodes, and this is about all about augmented realities and augmented world. We have our expert, Professor Rob from technology industry, as well as we have our Professor Edward. Always he's supporting us, World Talent Economy Forum, especially to develop our think tanks and our research and many more things. So I want to start from Professor Rob. How do you want to analyze today's topic, augmented reality, how it works, and what is the future?
Yeah. Okay. So augmented reality and virtual reality fit under a master category called mixed reality, which has recently gained kind of its own following. The augmented reality is when you blend rendered images with the things around you. The most augmented reality products in market, what they do is they have an integrated display. They don't occlude well, which means when they display something, it tends to show up in a ghosted image. It's particularly useful for things like training or field repair, where you've got somebody remote that can look over your shoulder. A lot of the glasses have cameras in them. They look over the shoulder, and then they can use the augmented display to point out where stuff is, how to fix stuff, and then of course you can tie it into a teaching system to do much the same thing at scale. Virtual reality is when everything you see is being rendered. You don't see any reality at all. And then the mixed reality, which was supposed to kind of blend the two concepts and be the master set, is coming forward. And some of the mixed reality products actually render everything, so that they've got cameras, heavy cameras, that capture the images around you, and then the rendering happens across the entire visual range. And so the rendered item and the physical item are able to mesh together so that ideally so the user can't tell the difference. That's kind of the goal. The mixed reality glasses, the good ones tend to run in the $5,500 range right now in the affordable category. Augmented reality stuff tends to run in around the $1,000 category. And virtual reality stuff, depending on where you're getting it, can range from the relatively cheap $500 range all the way up to $3,500. For some of the professional stuff. In augmented reality, the product historically to watch has been the HoloLens from Microsoft. That's kind of what broke the ground here. And what made a difference is they went in with the as part of the Mars exploration team, and they were able, because I got to participate in this myself, researchers were able to effectively walk on Mars in their office using images from the Mars Explorer, and and kind of experience what Mars was like. Not quite while they were there, because you could still see the desks and everything else, which could have a tendency of tripping over. And the initial product was tethered. The existing product is not. So that's kind of the state of the environment. As mentioned, augmented reality has had practical uses. Where we've seen it in the consumer space are in things like Pokemon Go, where instead of using glasses or headset, you're using your phone to do the same thing. And there have been efforts to use it for advertising as well, where if you hold your phone over a particular ad, the ad seems to come to life and pop out of it. And there've been augmented reality books that would do much the same thing for kids. The ones I'm aware of were mostly dinosaurs, but I'm sure there are others out there as well. And so that's my kind of quick overview of the three segments, but we're going to be focusing on AR, or augmented reality, here.
Thank you, sir. Professor Edward, how do you want to analyze this augmented world?
Well, augmented, of course, we all have natural capacities, physical capacities. We can see, we can hear, we can do this with our hands and so forth. When we're talking about augmented reality, you're talking about adding something to our own capacities. For example, I'm going to augment myself right now. There we go. Just put on my glasses. So in a sense, I'm augmented. I've added something to my eyesight so I can see a little bit better than before because of my problems with the eyesight. Another way I can augment is I can put on this. I'm not going to do it right now because otherwise I wouldn't be able to talk to you guys and see you directly. But of course, this is the Oculus. This is the first version of it. And my kids love it, by the way. And by the way, Rob, I'm going to walk on Mars probably this afternoon. I've got something downloaded here from the new probe that we have on Mars, so I'll be able to have a stroll on Mars before I ever get there. I am looking forward to getting there one day, by the way, just for your information. But more seriously, I mean, Rob's done a great job of discussing augmented reality, but I want to put it into the sort of wider context of society and of the economy. And what we've seen, of course, over the years and the decades is various kinds of augmented reality, not just visual reality. In a sense, it's like, for example, if you have a robot that somebody is controlling in a factory, in a sense, instead of using your arm to assemble the car, you've got an artificial arm assembling the car, and you're just controlling the artificial arm. You see this in one of the great breakthroughs is using augmented reality, in a sense, in surgery, where a surgeon can basically have gloves on and can be performing a surgery, and they don't have to be standing right in front of the patient necessarily. So in a sense, they're augmenting their capacities. Perhaps they're doing it even more accurately than their own hands can do it, which is marvelous because you can save lives, you can cure people of terrible diseases. Obviously, in manufacturing, we see this. But of course, as Rob suggests, what we've seen in terms of the popular use of augmented reality are things like with visuals, with glasses. And one of the things that we're coming to, I think fairly soon, probably in the next few years, maybe 5 years, is instead of having this meeting this way, and the three of us are looking at each other on a screen, we're going to be in a room together, and I'm going to see your hologram and Rob's hologram and my hologram, and it's almost like we're sitting together. What I'm hoping for at some point, because I love playing with my Oculus here, is you'll be able to be in an augmented reality environment where, for example, I have my keyboard in front of me. So I can be working, I can be looking at it. It could be either a three-dimensional thing, or it could be just a page of text or what have you. But it would, allow me to work and interact with you folks even better. You can show me if you have some mechanism that you want me to look at. You can say, well, look, Ed, we have this thing, and I can, take a look at it closer. So again, I think of augmented reality as one of the capacities that's being developed right now and expanded right now. Of course, it's visual, but it's going to be in other areas, audible, and even with the brain implant that Elon Musk is developing, where there's a lot of capacities to augment us. I mean, that's really science fiction at the moment. But you can see the direction it's going in, where instead of having to go through years and years of perhaps training or whatever, we can do something where it's implanted in my brain. Again, right now it's science fiction, but you can see we're moving in that direction. That would certainly be augmented. It would be augmenting my brain. And so to sort of conclude my initial summary, entrepreneurs in research, entrepreneurs in businesses and so forth, have to think of these as capacities that they can build on. They can take and either create different ways of new ways of doing augmented reality, or they can take what's out there now and say, wow, I could apply this to whatever I'm doing and mix it into whatever I'm doing in terms of whether it's research, whether it's medical, whether it's in manufacturing, or whatever the situation might be. And so to me, this is very, very exciting. And it's just part of the exponential technology revolution that's going to be changing our world and our society. And again, I'm so excited that it's not going to be just something in the United States. It's going to be around the world.
Thank you. Professor Rob, there are many interesting thoughts, actually. Professor Edward bring especially augmented brain, futuristic thoughts, and definitely it will be helpful for around the world. What are your thoughts, futuristic thoughts on augmented worlds? Yeah.
Well, we kind of, I think, blended a bunch of stuff there. So the glasses that Edward showed, those are virtual reality headset. This is a bit newer one. If I get up the camera, The difference is the newer ones have cameras built into them. The initial cameras are mostly so that you don't bump into furniture. They provide you with an image of some of the stuff around you, because the first group of folks that did the virtual reality stuff in their homes and offices discovered that the furniture they don't see can still hurt them. And and so the newer stuff has cameras. But the mixed reality stuff, really where the future is in this mixed reality where you blend what's real and what's virtual into a similar into the same image. That requires an awful lot of processing power, though. You can do it with workstation class. Typically, the workstation is going to set you back $5,000–6,000, and the headset's going to set you back another $5,000. So it's not really set for consumers at the moment. Mostly, it's being used for training. You may have seen that Microsoft just won a huge bid with the U.S. military to take HoloLens and use it as a battlefield augmented reality headset. And that's going to be kind of interesting. We've had several efforts to do this, largely unsuccessful in the field, mostly because the hardware wasn't quite ready for it, and you have to harden the hardware substantially for a battlefield implementation, so it could take an EMP if necessary, and so it would continue to work in a variety of conditions, be that rain, dust, or whatever. But the idea is then when you're in the battlefield, you get a battlefield view. You get a sense for where the bad guys are, where your people are. You should be able to reduce dramatically friendly fire incidents. You can lay down a fire mission digitally without necessarily having to paint the item with a laser. Just by coordinating with the rangefinder and the headset and the computer that's handling the artillery to deliver the ordnance, and that tends to make it a lot safer for the military. As we look to the future, though, and some of the stuff that we're coming up with, we're actually experimenting as I speak with augmented reality, going beyond glasses and going into lenses that you can put on your eye. And we've got to the point where we can power them if we can keep the power levels fairly low without actually having to wire them. Having wires coming out of your eyes would clearly not be ideal. But then as we look to the future, then most of us would have these augmented reality lenses over our eyes, and the end game would be to not only use them for information, because really that's, even though we're calling them augmented reality, they're not augmenting your sight per se yet, but they could. You could, much like you do with contact lenses today, you could use these lenses in much the same way, but you could have them so they could zoom in, zoom out. You could have them so they could see infrared. You could have them so the future really is both augmenting sight and augmenting vision with information. Car companies, as we go to autonomous cars, are talking about changing the entire windshield into a display. And there are a couple implementations of it. One is when the car is driving itself, the display turns into a movie screen, the side windows blank out, and it becomes a huge entertainment center. I've also seen situations and implementations where you use more of an augmented reality implementation, and while you're driving along, you may be driving along with, running dinosaurs or dragons flying overhead, or make it look like you're driving on Mars or something else. That we can actually physically do that now. The cost is prohibitive, but we can do it. In fact, they demonstrated at CES 2 years ago. So the level of augmentation is still at the beginning. Whether we're going to use contact lenses, glasses, transparent displays, or whatever, the gating factor with augmented reality as opposed to mixed reality tends to be obstruction. Is being able to occlude the items that are real, that are behind the items that are virtual, so it doesn't look like ghosting. If you look on the internet and you see some of the holoportation videos, which Microsoft has been circulating, what you see is the remote person looks like a ghost sitting in the room, and it's a little disconcerting. It's workable, but it's disconcerting. But if you had occlusion where the person that was remote could look like they were in the room, it would be much, I think, for most of us, much better. And of course, the easier way to do that is that mixed reality approach where you blend the images, and then you just render the entire scene, because then you can introduce physics, you can get the rendered item to work with the physical item and do some really interesting stuff. And as we're talking about holoportation rooms, a lot of discussion right now is about how about mirroring them. I mean, if you've got furniture in different places in different rooms and people coming in remotely and trying to interact, then you're gonna have some people running into tables that the other people can't see, other folks sitting at tables that are floating in the air. It's just, it doesn't work really well unless the physical aspects of the room are mirrored. Though I get a substantial amount of pushback whether that's necessary or not. Oh, and then one other element at GTC this week, they were showing LED walls. Initially being used for movie production, but instead of having glasses at all the surfaces around you become a display which accomplishes much the same thing. Doesn't technically fall under augmented reality, but has the same effect. If the room you're in becomes indistinguishable, say from a field in France, then you've displaced, and you still have the physical objects in the room. So you do in fact have a blend of real and virtual, but you got there a different way than the typical way we get there with AR or VR. So a lot of advancements going on now in this space, but the future probably is some type of a lens that you carry on your eye that's mounted, and of course the eventual future would be some type of optical replacement or brainstem device that took the signals that typically would come from your eye, reinterprets them, inserts them back into your brain, so you get a perfect blend. And of course, at that particular point, you can do the other stuff that we forget about when we're talking about virtual reality, which are touch, smell, the things that would really make it feel like you were in that virtual world, and being able to hold stuff. The area we're exploring now across all these spaces is how to better instrument your physical body so that you can walk and feel like walking, so that you can hold stuff and feel like you're gripping it, and so that the environmentals around you become increasingly real. And you can move beyond the experience. I don't know if anybody has actually experienced the Void VR amusement park rides, which sadly just failed during the pandemic. But they were the best. It worked with a combination of Sony and Disney created it, but it was about as realistic as you got. I played both the Wreck-It Ralph and the Star Wars event, and I got to tell you, when Darth Vader was coming at me with a lightsaber, I was backing up and firing for everything my life was worth, because it was that realistic. So lucky I didn't pee my pants. But it can be you can make these things incredibly realistic, probably more so than we would like.
Thank you, Professor Rob, for your excellent analysis. Professor Edward, how do you want to analyze more on industrial applications? And I just want to know that what are some obstacles with augmented reality? I think that one of the audience want to know.
Okay.
Beside that, how it create more opportunity for our youth community.
Right. Okay. Well, since Rob mentioned Microsoft and the Holo devices that they'll use perhaps on battlefields, I want to mention an interesting story from, I think it was the late 1990s or the early 2000s. I'm pretty sure it was the late 1990s. In the United States, the Pentagon was trying to develop a flight simulator that would allow pilots to train, virtually, and this would have been on screens around them, and they invested something like $1 million. And again, this was 20-something years ago. They were doing this to develop that software to train pilots. And then what happened was, by the time the Pentagon had that software ready, Microsoft had come out with software that you could go and buy at a hobby store for $50 or $100. And so they ended up, the Pentagon was putting $1 million into this. Microsoft was just going ahead and developing their consumer products, and they did such a good job that, the Pentagon ended up using some of that software that cost $50 or $100 rather than the $1 million software that they had developed. So when Rob was telling the story about Microsoft, now using the Holo technology on battlefields, it struck me that yes, well, this sounds like a similar situation in the past. To get to the obstacles, let me first mention a few things. about, for example, Rob mentioned touch, and he's correct that this is one of the areas where there, in fact, has been a lot of experimentation where you can put on some sort of full body sensor suit, and yeah, and therefore you get the experience not only of seeing something, not only of hearing something, but of feeling something. And of course, those who have something of a pernicious disposition might think, oh, this is going to be great for sex robots, and unfortunately that's probably going to be the case, but it goes beyond just those sorts of uses. And again, this is where the entrepreneur comes in, because 30 or 40 years ago, many of us could not have imagined where are the successes going to be using the technology that we have today. One of the successes is the conversation we're having right now, where you are literally 12 hours away different from me. You're on exactly the other side of the planet. Most of your audience is over there, and I'm sitting here outside of Washington, D.C. Rob is sitting in the United States as well, so or this area. So that's really great. But that's what I'm saying to young people, especially listening to this broadcast. You are the ones who are going to determine this. There are no rules, or formula to follow. That's the difference between an entrepreneur and somebody who might be a good administrator or whatever. Is the entrepreneur is trying to be creative and take these technologies. In terms of obstacles, I'll mention a few because I know there was a question about obstacles. Of course, one of them is cost, and that's always an obstacle. But this is one, and Rob has mentioned the cost of some of the augmented reality technology that at the moment only a business or a research laboratory can afford. But of course, we know that was the case with personal computers and with other technology for the information revolution. The first Apple computers, Apple II, were very expensive. They had very limited capacities, and it was basically businesses that needed, for example, to do spreadsheets better and the like, that would buy these. And then, of course, what Steve Jobs and what the competitors did is they said, we need to bring the costs down and down and down. And that's what happened. And so now pretty much most people, certainly in the industrialized world, have access to some form of computer or maybe a smartphone, which is another example. So cost is going to come down. And think of it this way. You always have beta users who basically get the technology early on. It's costly. It's very clunky. But then over time, it develops to the point where we can have a global conversation like we're having now. That's going to happen with augmented reality. Second, we don't know exactly what kind of and what applications are going to be best. A few years ago, Rob probably knows the dates better than I do, we had Google Glasses. And that was going to be the next big thing, where you simply put on a pair of glasses, and so you're walking down the street and you can see all sorts of information coming at you. You walk past a shop, and the shop basically is supposed to tell you, oh, here's what we have on sale. Or hooking it up with artificial intelligence. It knows that Ed Hudgens likes science and science fiction. So if suddenly I'm walking down the street and there's a movie playing, or there's some new device in a shop, it pops up on me. That was the Google Glasses. It didn't succeed. It didn't take off the way a lot of people expected, but it was there. So the other thing is going to be, we don't know exactly how the technology is going to be in the future. I'll give you another quick example that perhaps your audience knows about. In the, I guess it was the 1990s, Steve Jobs had been fired from Apple Computer. And they came up, the new management came up with a thing called a Newton. And for those of you, audience don't remember that, a Newton was kind of like a mini tablet. And you would take a pen and you would write on, and then supposedly you could simply write, "Hi, how are you doing, Sharif?" With a pen, electronic pen, and then it would be translated into text. And that was going to be the great new thing. In fact, I remember hosting an event on technology. It was probably in the late 1990s, and somebody had bought one of them, and they held it up to the TV cameras and said, hey, I've got this new device. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's kind of fun. The Newton didn't work. Okay, that was one of the ideas. But of course, later the tablets were developed and now are ubiquitous. So one of the obstacles is we don't know exactly what version of the technology at any given time is going to be the best application for a business, for a research laboratory, or whatever it happens to be, commercials and so forth. But again, that's what the entrepreneur is going to be doing, and hopefully the folks working on augmented reality are going to be very customer oriented, just like Steve Jobs was very customer oriented, and saying, let me see what businesses don't even know that they can use this thing that I'm going to develop, and then develop it and then perhaps market it to those businesses or research laboratories or maybe Elon Musk, who's going to need a lot of that to terraform Mars. And Rob, I assume you're going to be involved in that. And thank you very much for your efforts there.
Thank you. It's a really, really great session. I think our audience also enjoy. They are actually sharing our content, tagged our content, and many more things they are doing right now. There is a question for, I think, Professor Rob. Greetings from Malaysia, Nur Fazrin. How does augmented reality will change the world? I think they are very inspired with your explanations and lot of example. So if you give us more industrial explanations, because this is new for Asia Pacific, and especially for this student and youth community.
Sure. I do want to correct one thing, though, because I know some of my friends that are closer to Apple than I am are going to comment if I don't correct something. Steve Jobs hated Newton. I was the analyst assigned to that project. It preceded him at coming back to Apple, and it was one of the first things he killed.
That's right.
For the point that you made, the text recognition software was crap. But it did eventually evolve into the Palm Pilot, and then the Palm Pilot eventually evolved into the if you think of the evolution to the iPhone, and then we ended up with the iPad.
Rob, if I could just comment really quick, I was going to mention that it didn't work. It was terrible. I would write, "Hi Sharif, how are you doing?" and it would come up with.
I didn't want to connect it to Steve because Steve hated the price. He just wiped the entire thing out when he came in. But it does kind of show the how things can be very promising, and sometimes if you overpromise and underdeliver, which has historically been a problem for the technology segment, it can kill it. And you mentioned Google Glass. Google Glass set back augmented reality by about a decade. The reason is Google decided to bring it out in beta, and instead of giving it to people for free, made people pay for it around $1,200 a unit, and it was nowhere near ready for prime time. It had a camera on it, and that camera could record everything that you were saying, which is great, except when you walked into a bathroom or you walked into some place that people didn't want to be seen being. I mean, say you walked into a strip club or another. Now you're taping everybody that's there. It may end up on YouTube someplace. And the term, excuse the term, but the term for people that wore them became glasshole. So it was, and people would come up to folks that wore these things, and they would pound on them to get the glasses off. It was really, really, really bad there towards the end. But one of the worst program rollouts I've ever seen in my life, and it set it back. Now, when you talk about how it's going to change the world, imagine, if you would, being able to see the names of everybody that's walking towards you. I don't know about you, but I have a bad memory for names. And when you're relatively public like I am, people will walk up to you like they're your old, especially when I was doing television, like they're your long lost friend, and maybe you met them once 5 years ago at some party, and they're, yeah, how's it going, Rob? It's a long time no see. You're like, crap, who is this person? Well, with augmented reality, you could get the name of the person. You could also get a short background from them. It's kinds of things that we were developing for telecommunications in the 80s and almost still don't see very often today, but can be done with augmented reality glasses. You get the information you need when you need it. Say you're navigating someplace on foot, you can get the same GPS on-screen navigation you get with a heads-up display, except in your glasses, and it'll get you where you want to go. For people that are wandering through areas that are unsafe, which does happen every once in a while, somebody wanders into some area that is that is unsafe. Either there are hostile animals there or people or whatever. We had a case in, I think it was Brazil, where their GPS system took them into an area that was unsafe and the entire family was killed. So that of course it also showcases if the system isn't right, it could do you harm as well. It can guide you to safety or guide you into harm. But think of it, if there was a disaster, say like 9/11 type disaster, and the building's coming down and you can't see, the glasses could guide you out. So that it would change how you perceive the world. But with any change of perception also comes the chance for bias. Now, assume that whatever source of information you had was biased one way or another. And now when you're looking at a person in color, you're getting unfortunate words showing up in the display, or people are being highlighted based on their religious beliefs, sexual orientation, or whatever. That would be augmented reality used for ill. But potential is there for both. And like any technology, they can be used for good or ill. So talking about how you change the world, this could change how you perceive the world, the physical world, everything that you're seeing. And as you move from augmented reality without occlusion to mix that reality with occlusion, you could pretty much do one of two things. You could carve out and see the world you want to see. I was watching a video on YouTube the other day, which kind of anticipated that. It was a dystopian future where you wouldn't want to live. But as long as their augments were turned on, it looked like this beautiful place with flowers and angels and whatever. But when you took the glasses off, it was a cesspool of smog and rust and horrible stuff. The only things that remained the same were the the human elements of it, but even the clothing would be changed. And so it could change dramatically how you saw things. I mean, you would never need to have pictures on your walls again. You just have marks on your wall where pictures should go, and whatever picture you wanted to see on the wall would appear on the wall. Bill Gates in his house, which he promised to let me see years ago, and I still haven't seen, had pictures on the wall, displays on the wall, and based on the pin you had they gave you when you went into his house, those pictures would automatically change along with the ambient music to stuff that you like. So if you liked Rembrandt, all the pictures were Rembrandt. If you liked postmodern, all the pictures would be postmodern. As you came up to them, and the next person down the road would see something else. With augmented reality glasses, you guys could be both looking at the same thing and seeing something completely different. If you wanted to live in a world that looked like the Lord of the Rings, the J.R.R. Tolkien stuff, or Game of Thrones, you could have that world to look at. And and depending on how deep you got in that emulation, that might be, I mean, it would certainly color your views of things because that's all that you're perceiving. Though I think the end game there probably is more of a virtual reality environment where you're in a bed or not moving around, because of course the difficulty comes. And HP did I'll see if I can find that video when I stop talking. HP did an AR game called, I think it was Asheron's Call, and it's great. And I'll try to post the link to it. But it showed you what you could do, and folks are running around and they're chasing boulders and they're battling orcs. And at the end of the game, the guy that wins the game finds the princess, gets to kiss the princess. Of course, none of the feeling is there, but she's gorgeous. The boulders look real. But what it didn't focus, because the kids are playing the game out in the streets, is what if you don't see that damn car that's behind the boulder? Well, you're starting to fight it. Now you're fighting the fake boulder with your fake sword, and you get run over by a real car. It could be a really bad ending. And that kind of showcases some of the dangers with AR, is not seeing the very real stuff that can hurt you. I mentioned that some of the VR stuff, and the reason these VR things have cameras now, is because with VR headsets on, you don't see what's around you, and people have a tendency of running into furniture. Well, with AR, even without occlusion, it can be very distracting. And so if you're driving with AR glasses on and say a navigation element comes up, but it covers the child running out in the street, you're probably going to run over that child in the street. So a lot of this technology, especially in the automotive area, is either going to be on windscreen, in other words, on the windshield, and removed from line of sight, or so transparent it won't occlude what you're seeing, or it'll wait until we get to full autonomous driving, and then you'll be able to use it while the car's driving itself, but not while you're driving the car. At the really major stuff like driving through, Game of Thrones or whatever, yeah, you're not going to be doing that while you're driving, because that dragon you're swerving to miss might miss the car that's next to you that you're hitting instead. And I'm just dying to see that what would happen when you got into court explaining why the accident happened. But Your Honor, I saw a dragon and I had to swerve to miss it. Yeah, they might lock you up for a long time. It will most certainly change the world. I think mostly when we start to really blend the images, and more importantly, when we get the kind of AI support that keeps us out of trouble, so we can play it in the open, or when we get to the point where we can, fully engage the human brain and disconnect from physical reality and live in a virtual world. Both of those should be quite a bit safer than what we have today.
It looks like, I don't know if we
lost our moderators. So
well, if we're still here, I can still speak. Yeah. By the way, which science fiction movie was it? Was it Ready Player One?
Well, Ready Player One was that's where you wore the full suit.
That's right.
And then you had the advanced stuff was the isolation beds, right, that you could have for full immersion. But there's an entire literary class called Lit RPG where you can read about the stuff that doesn't exist yet. It's a great genre and one I've been hooked on for years.
Okay, yeah, because I'm a science fiction fan as well. So when you were saying you saw it in a movie, I was thinking, okay, let me see, was this Ready Player One or was it? There was another one with Bruce Willis as a detective. Do you remember that one? And again, it was.
Oh, that was the one where you had the robotic androids, wasn't it? The Bruce Willis one is you actually had a second body.
You had an avatar
in the second body. You had the avatar, and the avatar was, and then people were dying. And the thing was, you weren't supposed to be able to die as an avatar. The avatar could get damaged, but you were supposed to be isolated. And for some reason, a virus was coming in and wiping out the user. Yeah, that was a fun movie too.
Yeah. Anyway, so actually, if the audience can still hear us, I'll just mention. I hope so. I'll just mention that for many of us, certainly in the developed world, and actually I assume that's probably the case because American culture is everywhere, you probably are seeing a lot of these movies, and they really do kind of project various versions of what the future might be. In some cases, they are dystopian. In some cases, there's not a lot of utopia, and I wish there were more because that's the vision I think that I have and that Rob certainly has. I want to mention two things here. First of all, I want to do a shout out to Arthur C. Clarke, who is one of the greatest science fiction writers ever, and who lived most of his life in Sri Lanka. He was a Brit but moved to Sri Lanka and spent most of his life there. He's buried there. He's one of the giants in science fiction. One of his books, The City and the Stars, which came out in the 1950s, opens with this fellow is like on the back of a dragon, or he's fighting a dragon, and they're flying through mountains and all this kind of stuff. And then I don't know, have you been able to hear us? I don't know if you have, but hopefully. But anyway, in the science fiction movie, it literally opens with exactly what Rob is describing. And this is Arthur C. Clarke writing in the 1950s. So if you're interested in a very interesting book, The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke, who lived much of his life in Sri Lanka. But I want to mention something else I think is important for those listening, because I always talk about the importance of entrepreneurship. I also talk about the importance, or the capacity, I should say, of folks in more emerging economies to skip some of the steps that you see in the industrialized world, and to not have to go through all of the steps because the technology offers that capacity. But I want to put a little bit of a caveat there, because because a lot of the countries, especially for example, Bangladesh is much poorer than Malaysia. Indonesia is somewhere in the middle. They're doing very interesting things with their education system today. And I'm very happy to see the sort of things they're doing. But one of the things to be a little bit careful about, if it's planners listening to me, is to avoid too much of what we call technology pushing. And that is to say, the planners say, we have decided that the Newton is the wave of the future. So we are going to spend a lot of government money buying these Newton devices for everybody. And, of course, the Newton was a big failure, and that's what brought Steve Jobs back to Apple. But the idea is that governments will often put a lot of money into something because they think this is going to be the future, but it ends up not being. We have a big debate going on in the United States right now concerning communications. And right now we have kind of three big areas or ways to communicate virtually and to get online. We have fiber optics that kind of go down the street and go house to house or whatever. We have Wi-Fi, or let's say 5G towers are becoming the new thing. It was 4G, now it's 5G, which is basically a different kind of technology. And of course, we now have Starlink and we have satellites. So if you're in a rural area in the United States, instead of having to find where the fiber optics are hooked up, and it's probably going to be miles and miles from you, you can't get it that way, and you don't have a tower near you. Well, Elon Musk is providing a way. And we have a big debate going on in the United States now because the federal government wants to put everything, or really push fiber optics. But, that may end up, in fact, hurting rural people because it would cost too much, and, they could use the resources for other things. What I'm saying is that when we look at augmented reality, planners are going to be looking at ways to perhaps use it in industry, businesses, and so forth. But be as open as possible to keeping an eye out on, well, this one seems to be working a little bit better. Rob has talked about the importance of the mixed reality capacity. So, that might be something that is better than what's going on now. But the point is, keep as open as possible to what is the application, how does this work, and let's make sure that we don't somehow block off or head off the ability to move to other versions of the technology as they develop and as they become really the better way of doing whatever the task is that you're trying to do, whether it's in education, whether it's in manufacturing, whether you're doing surgery, if you're a doctor or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Rob, there is a question from audience. Just, I think you can clarify it in a different way. Is using augmented reality instead of pictures a valid research method to evaluate visual preferences? Thank you.
So the augmented reality is probably a poor use for this project. The reason is the lack of occlusion. If you're going to replace pictures, you probably want to use more of a VR set, because the difficulty is with AR right now, because you don't have occlusion, anything that's rendered has a ghost-like appearance. You can look through it. By the way, Sharif, I posted the link. The game I was talking about was Roku's Award by HP, and if I can't find the damn video on YouTube anymore, but it's actually in this Fast Company article that I posted. But you can and recognize that this thing was done 2 decades ago. So if you get a chance to check out the Roku's reward thing, it's well, there you go. Apparently, Sharif can't get to some of it, but sorry about that link. But you'd be better off with occlusion. The having the transparent images show up in front of somebody is going to be distracting. It's funny that same link works just fine for me. It wouldn't be a good use. VR would be better. And anytime you're trying to look at something where it isn't information, where it's something you want to deal with in its full depth, you need occlusion. And sadly, with AR right now, occlusion is a problem. There have been several attempts to deal with it, mostly with multi-displays, where you black out with a secondary display the image coming through the glass, but that increases the power requirements quite a bit. It increases the weight of the headset. And if you get a sense, we both showed you what VR headsets look like. An AR headset looks more like this. This I was looking for my other AR headset. This one, but basically all this does is it gets dark when you go outside, but it does have an LCD display and it just doesn't show information. It works like automatic dark glasses. But they're much lighter, and that's for, you know, if you're out walking around or whatever. If you put on a full-on VR headset, it's still quite a bit of weight to carry around. And as I mentioned, you're going to run into stuff. Even with the cameras, you can still discover that one thing that's out of range of the camera that your pinky toe will suddenly discover at speed, and your people around you will discover the length and strength of your vocabulary very suddenly. But that pinky toe stuff hurts. Anyway, so as we move into this future with augmented reality, it's really thought that AR is probably going to be, won't be the sustaining technology, only because the tendency to ghost and the inability to better blend the real items with the virtual items. As soon as you get the processing power to render everything, you can just do a better job. You can not only better display it for whatever vision requirements the individual has. So for instance, when you're rendering everything, you can render everything the camera sees. So use infrared to render things that you might not be able to see. We already see a little bit of that in the infrared systems that some cars have, where you can actually install a military grade one on one of my cars a few years back, where you could look out, and if a deer was approaching the road or whatever, it would pick out the body heat of the deer, and you could see it long before it hit your car. You can get those in the displays of cars now, and they function a bit like augmented reality because you're seeing something that you wouldn't be able to see with your naked eye because you're using an infrared camera to pick up the body heat of the animal. And now imagine being able to wear that on your head if you were hunting, if you were out camping or whatever. It's some of the bigger critters don't really sleep at night. They hunt at night. A full-size wolf will hunt at night. And if you walk on a sleeping bear, I once walked in on a sleeping buffalo, and I got to tell you, even though the buffalo was pretty nice, I saw my life pass before my eyes. It would be nice to be able to see that buffalo at distance. And with augmented reality glasses, you could see the heat through the foliage, which is what happened to me. In fact, sadly, what I was doing is I was saying, "Oh, look, there's a buffalo dropping. Oh, it's another one, and it's fresher. There's another one that's fresher." And now, oh, here's the buffalo. Whoa, okay. Clearly woke him up. Anyway, so it's just you can do a lot of things that are a lot safer. Right now, mostly, as I mentioned, augmented reality is being used for training and for some maintenance and repair work that's in the field. Boeing has aggressively used it, for instance, in airplane assembly and maintenance, which, given what's been going on with the 737, probably isn't the greatest example I could have thought of. But they've been very aggressive with regard to augmented reality, as have the other aircraft manufacturers, and it's heavily used in aerospace.
Thank you, Professor Edward. My question is that, like, as many youth communities actually, they're observing today's sessions and they are sharing this content. I just want to know how this industry create more opportunity for them, like job opportunity or entrepreneurship opportunities, and what is the future? Yeah.
Well, let me mention a few things to hopefully build on what Rob has said. It's a very excellent and learned presentation. And the first thing I'll mention is for the young people, we have a phrase, think outside of the box. Don't just think in, well, here we're talking about this issue and it's all in this little category or silo. Think outside. So, for example, we've talked about the more futuristic applications of augmented reality, where, for example, you go in a room and what you're seeing is whatever you want to see. For example, even with my Oculus, I can go into 4 or 5 different landing pages. And one of them is like on a space station, and it's really cool. And you see, stars and all this kind of stuff. One is like a lodge in the mountains, and you get beautiful mountain views. And there are different ones. So, one use in the future is we can have implants where I walk into a room and I don't have to worry about it. I just say, I want to have a mountain lodge now. But let's be realistic. That's going to be a way in the future. What you're going to see is the intermediate use of augmented reality for various things. So one of the things, for example, if your audience is listening to, thinking of ideas, is I want to redo my office. And I want to have different clothes on than I have right now. So what I can do is look at what designs I want, and I can literally look down and see what I look like wearing a different suit. I can see what it would look like if I have a different table here, or a different shelf here, or a different design here. I can see all of this. And well, this one looks too big. I'm going to make this smaller and so forth. And I do that. And then I push a button and tell the manufacturer, please print me out a suit that looks like this. Or please print me out a shelf that looks like this. Or this is how I want my room designed. But perhaps an entrepreneur will come up with blending that kind of augmented reality with the ability to market furniture, or market clothing, or market something else. So that's one way to think about it. In terms of the opportunities, here's an interesting. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but you asked about the future, and especially for young people in this country. When the personal computers were starting to become less costly and more businesses were buying them, especially, that was the first market for personal computers. When we were getting Wi-Fi finally coming in, when we were getting the internet finally coming in, there was a concern that this is going to wipe out so many jobs. Thousands and thousands of people, mainly women, were typists in businesses. If I wanted to write a letter to a client in a business, I'd do this, I'd hand it over, and some lady would type it up, and then I'd look at it and, oh my gosh, we're going to lose thousands and thousands of jobs for typists, right? Or thousands and thousands of jobs in the phone company or whatever. But of course, what happened was we created technology, in this case, both personal computers, which were much had incredible capacities, much more than a typewriter, right? And so what we needed is, instead of having lots of typists, we have lots of techs now. And the techs are providing much more added value than the typist, because the tech not only can, all the things that a tech can do. So the point is, I hope your young people especially will think of the augmented reality, as well as the other exponential technologies, incredible opportunities, because every time you've had these new technologies introduced, you not only create more value, but you also create more opportunities. So I'm very positive about the applications of not only this augmented reality, but every other technology we've been talking about on this show, artificial intelligence and so forth.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor Rob. What the future job opportunity or entrepreneurship opportunities actually created by this technology, and how it will works?
Well, so there'll be two sides of this. Certainly the hardware side, things like HoloLens, at least an AR HoloLens is kind of the product to beat at the moment. Lenovo has a lower cost alternative that's kind of in the same class. As we move to VR, you've got the professional headsets on one side, and then probably the best of the prosumer stuff is the HP headset at the moment. Oculus has been kind of the champion, along with HTC, of kind of plowing the field, but they're more consumer oriented in terms of hardware. I think the better opportunity is probably the software that goes with this, the content that'll be displayed on the glasses, with AR that's directional or interleaving, or coming up with a way to do occlusion inexpensively, are all opportunities. And then, of course, as it advances, the development going in for augmented reality lenses for the eyes, on that side, and then figuring out the difficulties, broadcasting power to it, making sure that the close proximity to your head, which is kind of hard to view to avoid with contact lenses, doesn't become a secondary problem and create some other issue. I don't know if you followed, but a lot of people are getting some rather unusual brain formations from holding their phones to their heads for long periods of time, thanks to the radios. So far, nobody's identified any material harm, but if it's causing your brain to change, and you don't know how what effect it's having, probably means you shouldn't be holding your phone to your head. Just a thought. But same thing for any of this augmented technology as you're wearing it all day, particularly when you're talking about the wireless stuff that's non-cabled, where you're putting fairly powerful radios in it to transfer the information, then thinking through ways to make sure that it's safe, make sure that there are ways to reduce the weight. For instance, the difference between the Lenovo AR headset and the Microsoft one is much of the weight on the Lenovo is in the power pack on your waist, not on the power pack on your head, which is where Microsoft puts it. So there are, and we're still at the front end. I mean, most of the advancement for this stuff is in the future. But if I were looking at this market as someplace I wanted to invest in and do stuff with, it would be on the software side, not the hardware side, both because the investment is lower, the opportunity is higher, and with software, your margins can be high enough to cover your R&D costs, where with hardware, that's much more difficult to do, especially when you've got multiple vendors in this space with competitive offerings. Be aware that what really makes the HoloLens different isn't the hardware, it's the software ecosystem Microsoft has wrapped it with. And that's really where the value of the product is. And so if you're working on this, partnering with one of the companies that's already developing in the area initially, and then perhaps going your own way with a unique implementation that deals with a problem that's unique to your geography, unique to your industry, something where being able to provide information in a heads-up manner can make a difference. And clearly, we're just starting with implementations in terms of military, aerospace, and the areas that are probably going to be impacted by this in the next waves. And the nice thing about building for the military, the bad thing is you're building for the military. The good thing is they got a ton of money. And so a lot of the initial development areas, in fact, most of the initial virtual reality stuff that was any good was all military, was done by Lockheed and used to train pilots. And if you ever get a chance to go into one of those virtual reality pods where you don't use headsets, they've surrounded them with 360-degree screens, and it really does feel like you're flying a 747 in a fully articulated pod. It's an experience. They had a spin-off, fighter-based virtual reality ride back in Silicon Valley a couple decades ago, and flying that fighter, of course. The difficulty, of course, when it's articulated and the rest of it is you can get airsick even though you're on the ground, as I discovered. But the experience is phenomenal. I mean, it really feels like you're in the fighter and you're being chased, and you've got banking and the rest of it. Behind me is a driving rig. You can kind of sort of see that's done so that you can do track training using virtual reality. I don't use the headset often. I use the screen. But you can also use that with a headset, and it feels like you're in the car. And the seat vibrates at angles and corners, and that's a relatively expensive rig. If you want to spend $50,000, you can get a rig that actually feels like you're in an F1 car, and it is amazing. My wife will not let me buy that rig, but it's clearly going to be on my wish list. And so as we move forward, things like making it feel real is where it is. Better controllers, body suits that provide haptic feedback for when you're playing a game or if you're out training. This stuff is used heavily for military and police training. Given what's going on in the United States, I wish it would be used a lot more for police training. It's a whole different story, but that's where the opportunity resides. Training peripherals, not main headsets, because there's just a lot of cost there. And software, the software to drive this stuff is where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's really great discussion. I'm sure our audience really enjoy a lot to the discussion because they are sharing our content, they tag our content, and they come up with the different questions. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today, and I want to give special thanks for today's session. It's really, really amazing, and it's really created good thoughts to our youth communities. So, Professor Edward, what the concluding remarks you want to give for today?
Yeah.
Then Professor Rob.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, just a few quick concluding remarks. First of all, I want to agree with Rob about software. Hardware is important, and I've talked about applying and looking where you can apply augmented reality to whatever your quest happens to be, whether it's manufacturing or research or whatever. But to give a little bit of history for your audience, if they're not familiar with it, in the 1980s, in the 70s, and then into the 80s, of course, Apple Computer and a lot of the computer companies thought the profits are going to be in the hardware. We're going to make these machines and we're going to make them more efficient. That was, of course, important. However, the reason why Bill Gates is now one of the richest human beings on the planet who has ever lived is because he saw the insight that hardware was going to become a commodity. And if he can develop the software that runs the computers and be able to license it out to different manufacturers, and of course, create the applications that are going to make the computers useful, that's where the money is going to be. And sure enough, he was right about that. And that's why he's not even the head of Apple or Microsoft anymore. He's doing a lot of charity work with the incredible fortune he's built up. Second thing I'll mention, because Rob mentioned the military uses, and I've mentioned a couple of those as well. Ideally, I want to see a peaceful world. I say make trade, not war. It's one of my phrases. And what I see is, hopefully, as this technology develops, it actually will keep casualties down. If you look at the wars that we've had unfortunately, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, the United States with the allies, in the last 20 years, the casualties have been much, much lower than they have been in past wars. And I hope maybe augmented reality will become so efficient that, well, it doesn't even make sense to have a battle anymore. So that's kind of an idealistic idea. We can talk about that later. I'll mention a couple other very important concluding remarks. Whenever I have these discussions, Rob may have had the same experience. I have people say, we're worried about what are called wireheads. That is, for example, with laptops and personal computers and gaming, kids or even adults who become so alienated from the real world and spend all their time in an artificial world playing games, that they're detached from reality. They're detached from their own lives. They become addicted to playing games or doing whatever online. And this is a serious problem in the West, especially. And I don't want to downplay it. It has serious social implications. I know I have two 10-year-old girls, and trying to say, well, you shouldn't spend all that time on your tablet. You have to go out and walk in the woods occasionally and do nice things like that. It is an issue. And so you're going to hear a lot of pushback with augmented reality about, well, this is just going to create this society of wireheads where we spend all our time in artificial worlds. We don't have true relationships with our with friends and neighbors and the like. And it is a challenge. And I don't want to downplay the challenge, but I want to say, don't let that stop people from, and especially young people, from getting involved in this, looking at this technology, developing this technology, figuring out how to use this technology. We have a thing called the precautionary principle, which is this conservative way of, well, we shouldn't do anything until we've tested it completely, which is impossible. We never would have invited fire if we had done it that approach. And there's a proactionary principle. The idea is you move ahead. You with technology and with innovation. If you see problems, you deal with them as they arise. So I hope that your audience, especially young people, will familiarize themselves with the argument of the proactionary principle as opposed to the other principle, so that you move ahead with these innovations, that you embrace these innovations. If problems come up, you deal with them as they come out, but embrace the technology, embrace the future. That's my message.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks?
Well, Edward talked about the kind of the potential for misuse. So, strange enough, we were both talking about science fiction, but the book by Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep, which became a movie, Blade Runner. And
AI also.
What?
Also, the movie AI.
Well, yeah, but different. Yeah, I got you. But the part of what made the Blade Runner, the part that was left out of the movie that was in the book, was the wife of the detective was in a pod, and it was in a virtual reality pod, and she didn't want to come out, and so he was effectively single because his wife had completely escaped reality and lived in the pod, and that was part of what kind of made him the person that he was, completely left out of the movie. But and then of course, in terms of military and savings, there was the private little war episode out of Star Trek where the people were you had war and the war was virtual, and then whenever you had a strike, so the buildings weren't damaged, you had to euthanize the people that were killed by the virtual bomb to protect the buildings. And the way they fixed that is they said, okay, let's go back to real weapons, and then the war ended. It had gone on for hundreds of years. So making wars painless did highlight that making wars painless could be kind of problematic with being able to end them, particularly if you were institutionalizing, euthanizing your people. But like Edward, I certainly hope that the stuff will be used to make people safer. The advantage for military applications for this stuff is really along the lines of friendly fire. Pretty much could eliminate friendly fire episodes. A lot of folks, some famous folks here, have been killed by friendly fire, and also people killed by just mispositioning and not knowing where they are in the battlefield, which can happen often in a large battle. Where you want to think and focus though is both on the good and ill that this technology could do. Like any technology, it's not inherently good or bad. Nuclear power isn't inherently good or bad. It can generate a ton of energy very efficiently, very cheaply, and very cleanly these days. On the other hand, Hiroshima. So the level of damage, and at this particular point, Earth-ending damage, it's on the list of things that would be existential threats to the race. Augmented reality has the same thing. If you were able to control what large portions of a population would see, a la Big Brother, another science fiction book, or even if you were talking about Brave New World, both authors were pretty consistent on that one aspect, is if you can control what people consume, you can control the population. And you can certainly imagine how that would end badly, particularly when you've got the inequities we have today between the very rich and the folks that are struggling at the bottom. One way to fix that, which wouldn't be a good way, is to augment the people at the bottom and make them see a different world than the world they were living in. And so and don't get me wrong, I have little doubt there are people thinking about doing that right now. So you want to think about what's good and ill. The telemedicine stuff we talked about, eminently good. You can take a doctor in one part of the world and introduce them into a surgical theater in another part of the world using robotics. Latency is kind of an issue. You want to have them operate themselves, but certainly they can direct another doctor from a distance. If they're closer in where you can control latency, and latency has been getting better all the time, then they could actually do the operation with a robotic Waldo that would actually handle the surgery, and that's been done now. And so it shows you just the amazing stuff that you could do. We've got, and as we start interleaving AI, which is this next wave of technology, where you could have an AI-driven digital assistant that appears whenever you need them, coupled with AI digital pets that are intelligent, that only you can see. You can certainly see for folks, hulled up during the pandemic, they could have virtual pets they don't have to feed or care for, but they could in fact observe and care for them, alerting if the person was hurt or injured and calling for help. Granted, the virtual stuff can't get you that can of soup you may want to eat, but it could certainly guide you to where the can of soup was, and if you fell grasping it, could call for help. And so the potential for good and the potential for evil with this technology is probably unlimited. And so pick your side. As mentioned, software is probably better than hardware. I do want to point out for Edward, the most valuable company in the world right now is a hardware, not a software company, which probably annoys Bill Gates to no end. But Tim Cook's doing fine. We'll maybe at a future conversation we'll talk about why that is a bad thing. But at the end of the day, you've got a choice in your life, and this is something where you could make a big difference. From health to training to retraining. I mean, we're going through a period of time when the skills that a lot of people have are going to become obsolete. One of the fastest ways to retrain will be with virtual reality and augmented reality training methods that do in fact scale. And one of the ways that you can take remote students and make them feel like they are in a school with other people is with virtual reality methods. So all of those things could make the world we're living in a far better, a far safer, a far more communal world if we apply the technology properly. If we apply it improperly, it could turn this place into a hellscape. So it's like anything else. Get on the right side, and have a wonderful life.
Thank you, Professor Robs and Professor Edward for these fantastic sessions. I am sure our audience will really enjoy today's session. Share our content as much as possible. Share in your classroom, share with your government, share with your corporations. This is our objective. We want to create more valuable content like this. And I want to give a big bow to all of our mentors and our speakers. It's really great sessions. Hopefully, we are in more interesting session on technology in the futures. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you.
Live long
Bye-bye.
and
Take care.
prosper.
Okay, bye-bye. Take care.